Hi there. Have you ever seen a man sacrifice his knight, a rook, another rook, and finally his queen and still deliver checkmate? Because that is what Dawid Janowski did in this very game. And the punchline is better than the sacrifices because he finished it with 2 bishops, which matters more than you think. Let me explain that before we start, because you see, Janowski was one of the strongest players in the world, and he had a kind of fetish for keeping his 2 bishops. Often, he would give up a knight, wreck his own structure, do almost anything to keep both bishops raking across an open board. Other masters considered it a hole in his understanding of chess, but today we are about to find out why this idea was nothing other than absolute cinema. Janowski has white against a very strong amateur, and in this game he starts with a handicap of 1 knight. So, pawn to e4, e5 in reply, and immediately pawn to f4, the king's gambit. He is already a knight down, and he's offering a pawn on top of it. Black takes. Knight f3, and black plays g5, propping up the extra pawn and threatening to chase the knight with g4. Janowski answers bishop to c4, aiming straight at f7 and completely ignoring the pawn on g5. So, black pushes it. Pawn to g4, and the knight on f3 is attacked. Janowski has to make a choice: move the knight or watch it die. Guess which one he went for? Yeah, you guessed right. This man sacrificed his remaining knight and castles instead. Well, black takes it. G takes f3, and Janowski recaptures with the queen on f3. So here's the count. He's down the knight from the odds, plus a second knight, plus a pawn. In exchange, he has 3 pieces developed, a castled king, and pressure straight down the f-file at f7, while black has not moved a single piece off the 8th rank. Black plays queen to f6, and it is the right move. It develops a piece, it defends the pawn on f4, and it means Janowski cannot take that pawn because a queen trade would follow. And without the queens, a man missing 2 knights has no attack at all. He would just lose slowly. So Janowski plays pawn to e5, sacrificing yet another pawn, purely to drag that queen off the defense of this pawn and make it uncomfortable in the center. If black does not take the pawn, well, Janowski would just reinforce the center with pawns, and that would pose problems for black. So he takes, and now the black queen is planted in the middle of the board, directly in front of her own king. Pawn to d3, bishop h6 from black reinforcing f4 again, and bishop to d2. Now watch the threat. Janowski wants rook to e8, pinning the queen on e5 against the king, and bishop to c3, skewering that queen and the rook on h8. However, black finds knight to e7, which answers both ideas at once, because after the rook slides over, black can retreat the queen to c5 away from the threat and still defending the knight. So Janowski decides to skewer with bishop to c3, and on surface it looks like black will definitely lose material here, but again he finds the best defensive resource. Queen to c5 with check, king to h1, and black castles kingside, sliding the rook out of the skewer and saving it. Janowski now brings his last piece up, rook to e1. Now, let me be honest about this position. Black is winning, not slightly. An engine has him up close to 6 pawns. He has 2 extra knights. Everything is defended, and his entire queenside is still asleep, which is exactly the problem. Janowski has about 10 moves to deliver mate before those sleeping pieces wake up and bury him. Black plays d5, hitting the bishop on c4, and this looks like the end of the attack, because if the bishop retreats, black rolls d4 and white's pieces have nowhere left to go without losing their attacking initiative. So Janowski does not retreat. Queen to h5, attacking the bishop on h6, and taking on c4 is now off the table because the queen on c5 would be hanging. And in this position, black finds a very interesting move, f6, shutting down the bishop on c3. But pawn to f6 was a mistake, because Janowski takes on e7 and sacrifices his rook for the knight, a whole rook for the knight that was holding d5 and eyeing f5.
Black recaptures with the queen, and bishop takes d5 with check. King to g7, defending the bishop on h6, rook to e1, second rook onto the file, attacking the black queen, and he plays queen c5. But boy, oh my, is that the losing move. It definitely looks perfect, because from c5 the queen pins the bishop on d5 against the queen on h5 along the 5th rank. Janowski's bishop cannot move. His queen can also not move because the bishop would then hang. It looks like black has dissolved that attack. Except rook to e8 wins the game on the spot.
Take the rook, and it is mate in 3. Queen f7 check, king h8, bishop takes f6 check. The bishop has to interpose on g7, and bishop takes g7 is mate. Refuse the rook and play c6 to win that pinned bishop, and it is mate in 7. And you have to see this line because it is the most ridiculous thing in the whole game. Bishop takes f6 check. The king has to take it. King takes f6. Queen takes h6 check, snapping off the other bishop. King to f5, the only retreat. Bishop to e4 check. King to g4, forced again, and the black king is now standing on g4 in the middle of an open board on move 20. Bishop to f3 check, and the king has to come back to f5. Now pawn to g4 check, and this is nearly mate already. Black has exactly one capture available, and it is a beautiful one. The pawn on f4 takes en passant, landing on g3. Bishop back to e4 check, king to g4, the only square again, and pawn to h3, mate. The black king is mated on g4 in the open by a pawn. Janowski did not see it. He played rook to e5 instead, which is still a rook sacrifice, still terrifying. The rook on e5 cannot be taken, because if the pawn takes anyway, bishop takes e5 is mate in 3. The king can't move, and so rook interposition is forced, and now queen f7 check. The queen cannot be captured because the rook is pinned, and so the only move is king h8, and now queen g8 mate. So of course, black does not take the rook, and plays queen f2, threatening checkmate. But he messed up big time there. He instead could have answered queen to d6 and been completely winning again, because after queen f2, Janowski now has the opportunity to deliver his favorite kind of mate. Rook to g5 check, sacrificing the rook the second time. Black has exactly 2 legal moves in the entire position. If he doesn't take and plays king to h8, then he loses to mate in 2. Bishop takes f6 check, rook takes bishop, rook g8 mate. So black has to accept the rook sacrifice and takes with the bishop. Queen takes g5 check, still cannot be captured because that f6 pawn is still pinned. King to h8 is the only available square on the board, and now Janowski sacrifices his queen on f6. Black's rook must take her, and finally, bishop takes f6 mate. Janowski had completely sacrificed all his major and minor pieces except the bishops, and still delivered a checkmate so insanely good, we're still making videos about it today. So, tell me in the comments, have you ever actually mated somebody with 2 bishops? I want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, please support the channel by subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.